Hey, so today we're going to talk about something that I probably should have talked about a while ago, which is something called counter-dependency. We've talked a lot on this channel about codependency, which is, can be summed up as the urge to merge, a very, very strong fawning response where the individual feels compelled to supplicate their needs for the needs of their partner. Usually this would have been learnt in childhood by a very self-centered, tyrannical, emotionally dysregulated parent who respects no boundaries, forcing their needs onto the child and parentifying and smothering the child with their needs. Codependency then becomes a core belief, a core operational sort of systemic injunction or command that says love is me giving all of myself, is me sacrificing all of myself for the needs of another person. Preferably that person should be very selfish, delusional, emotionally dysregulated, tyrannical, and extremely demanding. And in the absence of finding a person like that, well, I can just go and find somebody who has full-blown narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder or some variation in between the two. That fulfills the needs. That's why codependents, even if the parent didn't have NPD, will usually find somebody who is extremely emotionally distant or extremely emotionally smothering, who is basically incapable of offering healthy love. That's codependency. Poor internal boundaries, usually smashed in childhood, leading to an urge to merge with the other. The other should preferably be abusive. The counter-dependent comes from a very similar environment. They're raised in a hostile space where they're not given permission to be themselves. They're not given permission by the primary caregiver, the primary object, to be their own person. They have a lot forced onto them. They have ideas and feelings and concepts forced onto them in an extremely abusive way with no respect for their boundaries. And the response that the counter-dependent develops is less fawning and supplication and submission and more fight. So there's less of a fawn response in the counter-dependent, the urge to merge. The counter-dependent pushes back. They have an urge to push back and away. So when they are receiving that kind of sick, non-boundary respecting love, which of course is not love, it's attachment, it's the forceful, insecure needs of a non-boundary respecting parent just being pushed into them, not real love, they're learning that's what love is. The counter-dependent is learning, where the codependent learn love is sacrifice to an abusive partner who needs my soul, so that they can just live at a normal level. The counter-dependent is learning love is enslavement, love is torture, love is indebtedness, love is punishment, and love is pain. So fuck it, let's just push it away. Anytime somebody comes to me and they try and bring me love, I'm going to push back. And instead of being codependent, I'll be counter-dependent. Of course, because it's all on a sliding scale and a spectrum, and we're really talking about attachment styles, i.e. our capacity to experience love based on the models of loving connectivity that we learned from our parents in childhood, these things can change. So a counter-dependent frequently will be codependent as well. Codependents can move into counter-dependency. I read a little bit of literature on this. I do occasionally read a bit of the research when I can be asked. And it said that actually some research indicated that yes, you can get a counter-dependent frequently matching with a codependent. A lot of relationship counsellors say, that's what comes to them. You'll have a codependent and a counter-dependent. And apparently it's quite common for them to switch roles. So one of the partners will then become counter-dependent and the other one will be codependent. So you have this dance, like a push-pull. The push-pull, now I would like to address the fact that counter-dependency can look like many cluster B personality disorders, but isn't necessarily. Though many cluster B personality disorders are, of course, rooted in CPTSD, childhood trauma, attachment trauma, and codependency and counter-dependency. Mind blown. So it's not narcissists, codependents, it's actually codependency. The whole thing, including NPD. This drives some people crazy because it messes with their structure of how things work. The reason why I would say, and I'm not alone in this, that narcissism is one of the ultimate expressions of codependency is because that person's whole sense of self is rooted in the other. A codependent who is not a narcissist still has a sense of self, be it ever so fragile, be it ever so weak. You stick them on a desert island and they still have a sense of self. An NPD on a desert island probably going to kill themselves fairly rapidly or they're going to delusionally create an imaginary audience or imaginary people to be there with them extremely rapidly, because without an audience, without narcissistic supply, which comes from other humans, they cease to exist. So it's a little more complicated, but not that complicated. So we need to understand codependency, counterdependency is on a spectrum. Some of this will overlap with personality disorders, but not always. Where will the counterdependent look like a classic histrionic or a borderline? The counterdependent will look like classic borderline personality disorder because they're frequently engaging in push-pull. So even as they desire to bring people into the space so that they can feel love, as any human wants to feel connection, they will then immediately get into an internal fight with themselves, and they'll call themselves weak and pathetic for needing love. So they'll be in conflict with themselves, they'll kind of slightly hate themselves, and then they'll also slightly hate and be conflicted about the object of their desire. So the object of their desire, the object of their either sexual lust or desire to be connected with, they're going to slightly hate them as well. Why? Because this object, and if I'm a counterdependent, is making me feel dependence. How dare you? You're ruining everything. You're making me feel like I need you. I need to punish you. I need to punish myself, and I need to push you away. Counterdependence, therefore, can be a little bit obsessive. They can be extremely self-punishing. They can be extremely rigid. They can be workaholics or exercise addicts. This is according to the literature, but this is why. And they also engage frequently in a relational style that looks like classic BPD, whether male or female manifested, because of the push-pull. So you'll constantly be getting come closer, come very, very close, and they'll invite a lot of rapid, accelerated, boundary-breaking intimacy very, very early on, only to then push you away for having consented to it. So when you're dealing with a counterdependent, you'll find you're being invited to break down boundaries very, very rapidly. But if you want to develop a relationship with a counterdependent, and if you think somebody has counterdependency, my advice would be don't do it. But if one were to, or if you're in a clinical setting, resist the temptation to go there with them too quickly. They're going to invite you because they really are thirsting for it and hungering for it, but the faster it goes, the worse an abreaction, a response to it there's going to be afterwards. You will be punished for consenting to their intimacy. So at this point you'll be going, how is that not just pure borderline personality disorder? Wait, it gets worse. The counterdependent is also identified clinically and in the research and the literature by a grandiose sense of self, a need to be right, a punishing interpersonal style where you will be accused of making terrible, terrible mistakes and morally condemned for those mistakes. So need to be right, grandiose sense of self, moral rigidity and condemnation, and extreme levels of control. So not only can they at times look like borderline personality disorder because of the push-pull, but they can actually look like grandiose narcissism, because there is this false sense of self that is extremely self-centered, and a lot of the interaction will seem to be focused around that person and their story. And you'll notice when it drifts from them and their story that their energy levels go down, and they usually become re-aroused and reactivated and re-energized when it comes back to them again. You'll start to think, well, this is NPD. And it might be. It may actually be BPD or NPD, or it could just be a counter-dependent relational style. Over time, this would become quite crazy making. So you'll be pushed and pulled and pushed and pulled and pushed and pulled until you start to figure out the game, and you realize that if you pull away, you'll be showing disinterest, in which case you will be shunned. If you move too fast and pull in too rapidly, you'll be accused of being smothering and of rushing them, and you will be discarded. It is extremely easy to be discarded and to trigger a counter-dependent into a rejection phase, into a discard, into a devaluation, discard and rejection phase. In fact, you're really walking a laser the entire time. What does that sound like? That sounds like I'm walking on eggshells trying to avoid the other person's emotional flashbacks. What does that sound like? That's classic for BPD. Yes or no? Yes, of course. Most people watching this know that. If you're walking on eggshells with somebody and you're constantly going, well, I want to be close to you, but not too close, because you're trying to find that perfect magical balance where they won't have an emotional flashback, you're then into an area where functionally it may as well be BPD. One other point I want to make at this point, that's counter-dependency, how it can look like a personality disorder, particularly cluster B personality disorder, but isn't. There is still a human being there is still a vulnerable human being who wants love. They're just finding it hard to make that connection. Is that I want to make to people who follow this channel are usually people who find themselves in abusive relationships. They're typically the scapegoat in the family unit. And counter-dependence can be the scapegoat. They might not have been the golden child. The reason why they have this grandiose sense of self, the need to be right, and tend to be quite self-centered, is because they experienced an extremely smothering parenting style in childhood that they pushed back against, and they're still pushing back against it now. They're still going, no, I'm me, I'm not you, you're not going to push on to me, this is who I am. And that will it can lead to a very confrontational interpersonal style where they can come across as being bullying or arrogant or the old classic brutally honest, and actually it can upset people. This then leaves the counter-dependent in the awful position of having a constantly diminishing circle of friends and an inability to connect with people in a way that's meaningful, that can lead to self-isolation and depression, and a shitload of other psychological and physical conditions that come with self-isolation and the depression that self-isolation inevitably brings. So one thing I wanted to say to the fawning codependent scapegoats who follow this channel is, whether we're talking counter-dependency, whether we're talking actual narcissism or BPD or any of the cluster B, never get in a relationship to fix somebody. Never try and connect and love somebody to fix or help them. Never get invested into the game of, come with me, help me, next week I'll be fine. If we just get to here, we'll be okay. If I just get this job, I'll be all right. If you just lend me another 10 grand, I can get there, and then you and me are going to be fine, babe. If we just move to this country so I can do this thing, you fund it, by the way, everything's going to be okay. There's always one more thing. And the entire time, what you can end up with is a relational style that looks like something that I haven't spoken about and I've not seen much about it out there, negativistic narcissistic personality disorder. And it's exactly what it sounds like. A person who is moving from one catastrophe to the next, who constantly needs help. And the way of them maintaining narcissistic supply, and I've been in a long-term relationship with somebody like this, is through drama and tragedy and catastrophe. And your relationship actually just feels like you're on a TV show and you're just moving from one tragedy to the next. And you, the codependent, end up becoming like a personal therapist, a valet, firefighter, bank machine. You're constantly trying to put out the other person's fires so that you can just get back to everything being okay, so that you can be in a loving relationship. That's what you think. From their point of view, actually what they're doing is they're just stringing you along for as long as they can. People in the comments are going to back this up and say, yeah, don't do it, kids. I'm 70 years old and I did this for 50 years and we never put all the fires out. Doesn't happen. So never get with anybody to change them. What can the counter-dependent do? If the counter-dependent really wants to overcome this, they need to realize first and foremost they have a problem. And then they need to seek professional help from somebody who really, really understands counter-dependency. You're going to have to learn to be more compassionate. You're going to have to learn to be humble. The arrogance and the rigidity and the constant need to be right can only really be, you can't really deconstruct it directly, but you can develop the skill set of humility, of going, okay, I'm human, just like everybody else, I'm fallible. I'm human and I need to practice humility. I need to practice to respect other people's boundaries and to respect that other people also have things going on for themselves as well. It can't be all about me. that again is a drifting into the borderline personality disorder spectrum, which I'm not saying every counter-dependent is, where the belief is nobody knows pain like I've known pain, nobody suffered like I've suffered. That's a really dangerous belief to carry, and it bleeds out into our interpersonal relationships with an attitude of entitlement. Not, I'm entitled because I'm better than you and stronger than you, grandiose narcissism. I'm entitled because nobody's ever suffered in the way that I've suffered. That's more of a fragile narcissist, vulnerable narcissist, or borderline philosophy. It's a bad one. So where we see that in ourselves, that extremely high level of self-pity, an extremely high level of going, nobody's known pain like me, or nobody ever shows me empathy, nobody ever shows me compassion. We need to watch that we've not drifted into a rigid, delusional space. And don't feel bad. Don't shame yourself or guilt yourself for this. It's very, very common amongst codependents. It's very, very common amongst people with CPTSD. And we just need to sort it out. We've got to get that wound out into the sunlight and dry it out. And just go, okay, well, this is not rational. This is not true. You know, who knows what other people have suffered? Who knows what other people are going through at any particular moment in time? So you need help. You need to be humble. You need to forgive yourself. You need to stop this shaming, guilting, superego voice that's running inside of your head. There is a course that is coming out soon on dealing with CPTSD. It's a new course I was teaching in America that looks more at the superego and what we can do to deal with these superego patterns that we're carrying inside of us and to recondition them. Because a lot of this it's a hyper-inflamed superego, which is the part of the brain or the consciousness or the unconscious that was hijacked through a traumatic parenting style in childhood that's just playing recordings. And it's like, you're worthless, you're a piece of shit, everybody's worthless, everybody's a piece of shit. It's a hostile world, it's a dangerous world, it's a dog-eat-dog world, do unto others before they do unto you. So on and so forth. And there's a lot of clusters then, constellations of negative beliefs that are pulling into each other that create this self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy for the counter-dependent that they need to become aware of is that everybody they get with is going to be a worthless piece of shit. Now, logically, we have decision trees inside of us, and we go, well, like if I'm dating a girl, I'm going to go, if she does this at this point, then it means X, and if she does this at this point, then it means Y, and I'm looking for red flags because I don't want to make the mistakes I made in the past. But if all of my decision trees come back to one conclusion, which is this girl's a piece of shit and she's not worth anything, I'm playing a game with myself that is a false game. Like, there needs to be another conclusion there, right? The other conclusion is, yeah, if we go through the decision tree and this and this happens and this happens, actually she's a decent human being. If I only have one outcome, which is she's a piece of shit, no matter what, that's not fair. That's not a reasonable game. For the counter-dependent, that's the only conclusion they ever come back to. Why? Because their ultimate formation is, leave me the fuck alone. Get away from me. I don't want love. Any love that comes in is always poisonous and torturous and dangerous. Push it away, I don't want it. And then the next minute, I feel lonely, I want love, please come back. Please come back to me. Fuck you, I hate you, you're a worthless piece of shit. Please come back to me, I'm really, really lonely now and it sucks in here. So it's a tragic situation to be in. And you know, if on the outside of this, whether you're a therapist or you're in a relationship with somebody or you've got a family member like this, try and have compassion for the fact that that is a deeply wounded inner child that's stuck. They're stuck in it's like arrested development, in an infantile state, and all of their control strategies and all of their relational strategies are probably the control and relational strategies of a 14 or 15-year-old. So if they act in a way that is bizarre or seems a bit odd, then that could be why that is happening. But really the outsider, the person who stood outside the cave that the counter-dependent hides away inside of, can't really do that much. It's for the counter-dependent to walk their way out of it. And it will be hard, because it will take vulnerability, and it will take exposure to love, which means exposure to disappointment, which means exposure to the possibility of being hurt and going back into the emotional flashbacks of youth. So another thing that a counter-dependent can do is to learn to resolve their CPTSD. If you're emotionally flashbacking really hard, go and learn to develop the skill set to heal your emotional flashbacks, to heal your CPTSD. If you take your CPTSD functionality, if you're running at 20% and you can run now at 80 or 90%, which anybody can do, dealing with counter-dependency at that point is going to be so much easier, because the flashbacks create massive amounts of emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation warps perceptions. So at that, once you're flashbacking, you're emotionally dysregulated, the person or people who you're connected with, you're going to start going, oh my God, they're a piece of shit, they're fucking awful. Get rid of them. Why? Because I want you away from me. Why? Because that's where relief is. Once I've discarded as a counter-dependent, I'm back in control, I'm invulnerable, and I go back to my safe space. And there's a relief there. Because the entire time that I was entertaining the possibility of connection with a human, I was agitated, I was anxious, it felt uncomfortable, because I'm out of control and that person could hurt me. Whereas if I'm the one who's arrogantly dismissing them and going, kiss you off, goodbye, I'm still in control and I'm okay. And lonely as fuck, and having no future. Not really. We're tribal creatures. You can't really spend the rest of your life just on your own, because with no meaningful connections with other human beings, because you're going to go crazy and you're going to be miserable. You're going to be anxious and depressed, and then you'll be saying, why am I anxious and depressed? Shall I take pills for it? No, you should deal with the fact that you can't connect with other human beings in an equal and balanced way because of the horrible things you experienced in childhood. So deal with childhood trauma, deal with CPTSD, and try to work on the beliefs that are holding you in place, that are holding you back, and say, you know what, love was bad when I was a child. Love was torture, love was indebtedness, but love doesn't have to be now. I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adult, and that person is an adult, and they can understand me, and they can hear me, and they care about me. And I know that they care about me. This is where being philosophical, objective, detached, and using mindfulness will help. I know that they care about me, even though the superego and my emotional flashbacks are twisting my perception, telling me they don't, because I know they did this, and this, when there was nothing in it for them. Nothing at all. I know that person cares about me. I know that there are good people out there. Why? Because I've seen this, and this in the world. For everybody with CPTSD who's somewhere on the codependency, counterdependency scale, we all have to learn to do this. It's a philosophical exercise. People always ask me, how did you recover? One of the biggest leaps in my recovery was back in 2014 when I was still living in Malaysia. And, you know, I spent a month re-brainwashing myself out of the shit that I've been living with my whole life. That's where the discipline program comes from. And part of that re-brainwashing was to get really objective, really scientific, and say, how do I know that what I'm thinking is true? How do I know that what my last conscious thought that I just had about me, about reality, about love, wasn't due to previous trauma or emotional flashbacks? And I started checking everything and questioning everything and getting really, really strong, really growing that muscle of objectivity and practicing it every day. How do I know that that's true? How do I know that's not true? Is there no evidence whatsoever that what my brain is telling me or my superego is telling me is awful and dreadful about the world? Is there any evidence that it's not true? Yeah, okay, there is this, and then this, and then this. Okay, and now I'll sit with that. It's a skill, takes time. Stuff that happened in childhood when we were extremely neuroplastic. The brain was at its peak of neuroplasticity, meaning it physically was capable of learning a lot because it was soft, it was in a more malleable state. As we get into our early 20s, and then by the time we're 25, that gets a lot stiffer. So you've really got to work in order to get through that get that neuroplasticity going again, so that you can create new neural connections. Love doesn't have to be pain and indebtedness and nonsense. The past doesn't have to equal the future. What my mother, my father, my environment taught me about connecting with other humans as true might not actually be true, and there might be another way. But it's down to me to fix this. It's down to me to make this right, without going into self-pity mode. Oh, it's always down to me. Everything is down. Well, who's going to help you? Like, you've made it so that nobody can come and grab you and pull you out. Who's going to fucking help you? You're going to have to walk out yourself. Nobody can get to you because that's what you've set up. For the counter-dependent, my final point would be this. Watch yourself. Be mindful, be detached, and watch what you do. You will see that you're very frequently saying to people, come closer, and then when that person comes closer, you're angry with them for coming closer. You're constantly creating situations where you are deliberately and consciously isolating yourself, And then the very next thing you do is complain about the fact that nobody wants to talk to you. So it's about the maturing those parts of ourselves that got stuck, facing up to our responsibilities as an adult. Yeah, you're right. It does suck that you still have to do this, but if you don't, who will? Do that work, get that work done, start making connections with people, slowly, organically, over time. Learn that not everybody is out to destroy you, not everybody is trying to fucking take everything away from you, that actually some people just like you because you're likable, because you're a lovable person, and move forward from that point. You start building new reference experiences, which is the posh psychological way of saying beliefs. You start to develop new memories, new beliefs where you go, oh yeah, I did actually connect safely with that person. I did actually connect in a way that worked with that person, that person, that person. And then a little bit of love, in the psychoanalytic sense, attachment, connection, in a safe and boundaried way can start to come in. And then you can learn slowly, slowly over time that you can connect safely in a boundaried way with other human beings. It's like yoga, move into the stretch slowly, take it easy, but you do need to move into the stretch, and that involves discomfort in order to learn as you move into the yogic stretch that actually some attachment is safe and some love can actually be safe. Okay, so that's my video on codependency. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Cheers. Cheers.